24. The kitchen is still dark when I step onto the cold floor. Lantern light flickers against the cupboard doors. The stove clicks as it cools, a small sound that feels too loud in the silence we left behind last night. My hands move on their own, kneading dough that hasn't risen yet. The air smells like wood smoke and damp wool. I keep my eyes on the table because looking up would mean remembering his voice. I tell myself I am calm. I tell myself this feeling is obedience. No one ever told me there was another word for it. My name is Sarah, and this is Quiet Stories from the Amish world. If you've ever stayed silent because you believed something was simply the right way, you're not alone here. Subscribe if these stories matter to you, and tell me in the comments, what word were you taught to use? In our world, mornings began before the sun, and questions were supposed to end the night before. I learned that early in marriage. A wife did not carry yesterday's uncertainty into today's work. She rose, dressed, fed the fire, and kept the house moving forward. I was good at that. My body knew the rhythm even when my chest felt tight. We believed discipline made a home peaceful. We believed silence kept love intact. When something felt heavy, we didn't name it. We worked around it. I had been taught that unease was a sign to look inward, not outward. If something felt wrong, it meant I needed correction. We used that word gently. Correction, not punishment, not blame. Correction sounded careful, almost kind. It came from Ordnung, the order that shaped everything from our clothes to our marriages. Ordnung taught that a husband carried spiritual responsibility for his home, and a wife carried the responsibility to yield. Gelassenheit was praised above all else. Yielding wasn't weakness, it was holiness. My mother said that. My grandmother lived it. On Sundays, the bishop spoke humility like a shelter that kept families safe from pride. No one raised their voice when they taught this. That made it feel trustworthy. In my marriage, correction never looked dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors. It arrived quietly, usually after supper when the dishes were drying and the day felt finished. My husband would lower his voice and explain what I had done wrong. A tone, a word spoken too freely, an opinion offered where it wasn't needed. He didn't ask what I meant. He told me what it meant. My role was simple. Listen, agree, adjust. I learned how to nod at the right moment, how to soften my eyes, how to accept the weight without letting it show. What stayed with me wasn't fear. It was smallness, like a lamp being turned down, not off. I didn't feel harmed. I felt shaped. And because I believed shaping was love, I thanked God for it. When correction came, I searched myself for the flaw that caused it. Had I spoken too quickly, thought too loudly? I told myself a good wife anticipated her husband's needs before he had to name them. If he corrected me, it meant I hadn't been careful enough. That logic kept everything contained. It also kept me very quiet. There were days when the community felt like proof that we were right. Sunday singings in a warm barn, voices layered and steady. Children asleep on quilts. Women passing bread without speaking because no words were needed. I loved those moments. I still do. The belonging was real. The tenderness was real. That's what made the harder parts invisible. When a system gives you beauty, you don't rush to question its costs. You protect it. I protected it by telling myself my discomfort was a spiritual test, not a warning. Once, after I spoke too openly in front of a neighbor about a family decision, correction came quickly, not in public. Never that. It waited until the house was quiet again. My husband explained that my words could confuse others, that leadership required clarity, that wives should support, not complicate. He was calm, certain. I remember folding my hands in my lap, staring at the grain in the table, and feeling myself shrink to fit the space he left me. I apologized. I meant it. That part matters. I didn't question whether correction was right. I questioned whether I was. That distinction shaped everything. Each year, the space for acceptable speech narrowed. Asking why became hesitation. Hesitation became resistance. Resistance required correction. I adjusted faster, learned to speak less. I told myself this was maturity, growth, faith settling into place. If something inside me pushed back, I pressed it down gently, the way you smooth a wrinkle from a quilt. Over time, I stopped noticing the pressure. That frightened me later, but then it felt like peace. There was an older woman in my life, my aunt, who sometimes watched me with a look I didn't understand. Not judgment, not pity, just a quiet knowing that unsettled me. I assumed she was measuring my progress as a wife. Now I wonder what she saw. Correction came more often as the years passed, even as I tried harder to disappear inside it. One evening, after another calm explanation of my failings, I sat alone with my hands folded and felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest. I thought it was conviction. I didn't know the word for what it truly was. The day it shifted did not feel important at first. I was sitting at a quilting table, my hands busy with fabric touched 100 times before. The room smelled like starch and warm tea. A woman sat across from me who wasn't Amish. She had been invited often enough that we stopped calling her new. She spoke gently, listened more than she talked. We were discussing ordinary things: weather, children, how long winter seemed to last. I remember feeling relaxed, safe. When she asked how decisions were handled in my home, I answered without thinking. I used the word the way I always did: correction. I said it plainly, almost with pride, her hand stilled on the quilt. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. She didn't interrupt me. She let me keep talking as I explained how correction helped keep order, how it protected harmony. I told her it was part of being a good wife. I told her I was grateful for guidance. As I spoke, I watched her face change, not into shock, but into something heavier, thoughtful, careful. I mistook it for confusion. I began explaining more, translating our ways into language she might understand. I didn't realize yet that I was the one being understood in a way I never had been before. Before she answered, I told her about another woman, a neighbor I quilted beside for years. Her husband corrected her too, always calmly, always privately. That woman kept her eyes lowered even when she laughed, as if joy itself needed permission. I had admired her modesty. I offered this story as proof that nothing was wrong. This was simply how things worked. As I spoke, I felt something loosen in me, like I was building a case without knowing what side I was on. The room felt quieter. Even the quilts seemed to listen. If you've ever explained your life to someone and felt the ground tilt slightly under your words, you know this moment. If stories like these matter, stories told slowly, honestly, subscribe to Quiet Stories from the Amish world. And if this feels familiar, tell me in the comments. What was the thing you once thought was normal? She waited until I finished. Then she asked one question, not sharp, not accusing, just careful. Did he ever ask for your perspective afterward? I shook my head. She nodded once and said softly, where I come from, when only one person is ever wrong, we call that something else. She didn't say the word. She didn't need to. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not all at once. It felt like standing inside a house I'd lived in my whole life and suddenly seeing it from the road. The walls were still there, the windows, the door, but the shape was different from the outside. I felt grief before anger, loss before clarity. I realized how much effort it had taken to keep believing what I believed, how much of myself I had folded away to make it fit. The outsider didn't rescue me. She didn't argue. She simply let the truth breathe. I want to be clear about this part. My husband was not a monster. He was shaped the same way I was, taught that leadership meant certainty, and that certainty required silence from others. The community was not only cruel, it was also generous. It fed us when we were sick. It sang with us when words failed. Both things were true. The beauty was real, and the harm was real. I stopped trying to choose between those truths. Holding them together was harder, but it was honest. Later, I thought of my aunt. The look I never understood. I saw it differently then. She had known. Or she had felt the edge of knowing and lived without language for it. Many women did. We learned endurance before we learned words. When I finally named what I had lived inside, it wasn't with a loud term. It was simple. Control that wore the clothes of correction. I had helped dress it every morning. I had called it faith because that was the safest name I knew. Now, when I stand in my kitchen before dawn, the room looks the same. Lantern light, cold floor, bread waiting for my hands, but I move differently, not carefully, freely. If you're listening and something in your chest feels tight, I won't tell you what it means. Only this: you are allowed to ask what words were given to you and who they were meant to serve. An outsider's quiet question broke something open in me. I hope something in this story does the same for you.